Welcome to the Marriage Puzzle Podcast with Julie and Thomas Hobby. We are marriage coaches who help couples with pain points about money, intimacy, and communication go from being overwhelmed to being secure in their marriage.
If this is your first time listening to us, thanks for checking out our podcast. And don't forget to subscribe and leave us a rating and a review. Let's dive into this episode.
Hello, Marriage Puzzle friends and community. I'm Julie, and I'm usually joined by my co-host of a husband, Thomas. But today, I thought I would jump on since he's been handling the podcast when I was on bed rest and then had our fourth child. And now it's my turn to kind of return the favor and give him the night off as he's visiting our fourth child who's currently in the NICU, and we kind of tag team who has our other three kids. I was with our baby all day, and so now it's his turn to go recording this at night, and he's visiting. But I'm not alone tonight. I am so privileged to have a guest on our podcast still talking about marriage, and I'm joined by a very close friend on Instagram with Amberly. Amberly, welcome.
Thanks, Julie. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, if you want to introduce yourself and or maybe even talk about your marriage and how that started and kind of the marriage space that you're in.
Yeah, so I run the website A Prioritized Marriage. I also run a local date night website and just share local date night ideas. But my husband and I just celebrated 11 years of marriage. We have two kids. They're 7 and almost 6. They're 16 months apart. That put them way too close saying they're 16 months apart. And we live in Utah, and we had a high school class together. And so we knew of each other, but we never ever talked. We say I just stared at him because he was super cute, but he had a girlfriend. And so we officially met a few years after high school. Our families actually lived just down the street from each other. But we never ever talked. And then he says he saw me for the first time after all those years and said to himself, I think her name is Amber and she used to want me. And apparently my creepy staring at him all the time did not throw him off. And so we've been married. Yeah, we've been together pretty much ever since. Just from that day, we hung out or talked every single day. And yeah.
That's so fun.
Story.
I love it. And I love what you're doing with A Prioritized Marriage. Really aligns with what Thomas and I love to preach, I guess, or maybe that's too strong of a word, coach, with date nights. And even recently, I love how you said on your Instagram page to budget for date nights, and make that a line item and things like that. So, we were just talking last week with our, story of having our fourth baby 15 weeks early, and just kind of the hard times that he's going to be in the hospital for a really long time. And so just kind of navigating that with all the driving back and forth to the hospital, and the other, we have 2 8-year-old twins and a 3-year-old daughter named Amber, saying, I love your name, Amberly. This is close to our daughter's name. And we could put our marriage on the back burner or even worse, we could have fallen apart when I was away at the hospital on bed rest before our baby Jordan was born. And so we just talked last week about the importance of investing in your marriage, both with time and money, to make sure you build and maintain a marriage foundation so you could weather, whatever storm might bring you in your relationship. And so you had agreed to be a guest on our podcast back when I was on bed rest, but when we aired this episode last week, it sounded like you kind of, it might have resonated with you as well with your story and what you guys do in your marriage.
Yeah, for sure. So I've run A Prioritized Marriage since probably like 2015, 2016. And in 2006, well, it was probably 2014 when I started A Prioritized Marriage. And I've gone to school. I have a degree in family studies. I'm getting a master's of education with an emphasis in family life education. And marriage is just something I'm super passionate about. I've always loved relationships and relationships dynamics. And so we actually found ourselves kind of in a similar situation to you, not quite the same timeline as you guys. With my second, I mentioned my kids are 16 months apart. They would have been 18 months apart, but our youngest came 2 months early. So my water broke 8 weeks early at 32 weeks. And I was put on hospital bed rest, and they hoped I would stay there for 2 weeks.
Right.
And I,
Here. You
so
can
like,
do it.
yeah. And I completely admire you for the time that you were on hospital bed rest. When I realized how long, I was like, I had one day basically of hospital bed rest, and I couldn't move the whole time because I had an epidural and had the steroid shots for her lungs. And my husband says, you were just crazy. I did like 12 hours of work from bed because I was still trying to get, I was working full time and trying to get that ready, but we didn't even get the 48 hours from her first lung shot, and she was ready to be here. And we were in the NICU for 3 weeks. We were lucky she got to go home after 3 weeks. But even so, like that time in the NICU, like you said, like it could make or break you. Is kind of, and I think that was a turning point for me, realizing that like you get to determine whether it's like a NICU stay or an illness of one spouse or whatever that looks like. There's always going to be these things that come your way, and they can either make or break you. And you get to decide: are you going to put your marriage on the back burner, or are you going to come out the other side better? And I feel like our experience with our time in the NICU, I mean, it took some work, it took some effort. And I have a whole entire post about it on my website. But because we chose to put time aside for our marriage and put energy aside for each other, and money aside for our marriage, right? It's talking about that, like budgeting for date night and stuff. And I can talk a little bit more about that if you want. But that we actually came out the other side of that, like the NICU. I have a whole post that sounds so silly, but it's a post like entitled "Why I Missed Our Time in the NICU," and talking about how it really showed us what was important, and it gave us the excuse, I guess, to push everything else aside and focus on what was really important. And we came out of the other side of that stronger and a better couple, and that 3 weeks really strengthened us rather than just letting our marriage float or having our marriage come out the other side rough and rocky.
Wow. I love that perspective too, because, in your similar situation for our listeners, you can fill in the blank and replace the word NICU. You gave some examples. We gave some examples last week on the episode before this. And it's whatever your heart is, right? Whatever you were expecting. That's actually why our brand, if you will, is called Marriage Puzzle, because it sounds silly, but we're always talking about just uncovering, turning over the puzzle piece that you didn't know, and you don't know where it fits or where it goes, and you could just leave your marriage a mess then, or really work on putting it back together, or building the border, the edges, whatever analogy you want to use, but insert the word that you might be going through or that might come, and that's where I love that you guys had the foundation, though, to be able to go through that hard and then, like you said, come out stronger. So absolutely, let's talk more about that, of like, what are some practical ways you and, is it Joe, your spouse?
Yeah.
Husband's name's Joe. So what are some practical ways you and Joe have, done that to prioritize your marriage or build and maintain that foundation?
Yeah. So I think we take time, and I'm going to kind of just talk about it in the NICU sense since we're already talking about this. But like you said, it goes with anything. Like right now, we're both in school. We decided to do that in our 30s, the married college student thing. It's not my best idea, but it's working out. Or different stages of parenting, or I had surgery this past December. So there was like the 3 weeks of surgery recovery, and then we all got COVID, so it's like, there's all these different things, like you said, that come at you and you have no idea how that's going to work out. And it could be 1 to 2 days, or it could be months, or it could be years. But going back to that NICU thing, so we had a 16-month-old at the time at home, and we were lucky to have family nearby. And so we set up a routine, and that he spent 3 days with one grandma and 3 days with another grandma and then 3 days with his aunt, and then we'd start again. So it wasn't different every single day, but it wasn't wearing on our family. And we set up a daily routine where I was with him in the mornings and then I would drop him off, and then Joe was with him at nights. And so we got kind of that time. And then we also tried to do like one time a week, we would like meet for lunch at whoever's house he was at before I went to the NICU, and we would have family time, or grandma brought him down and we had like a picnic, or he came down and visited his sister and we played it with some of the stuff they had in by the NICU. But for our marriage specifically, like we had all these moving pieces. We both knew we needed quality time with our toddler. We both knew he needed family time. We both knew we needed time for ourselves. I would often get to the hospital and I would go take a nap, and then would go see our daughter. And it's hard because you feel like, oh, it's so important. I need to spend all this time. And then my husband would come after work and he would spend time with me and her in the NICU. And then we would do our connecting time. So that's one of the biggest things is we find time daily to connect. And it might be 5 minutes. It might be 20 minutes. It might be half an hour. We might get an hour, but we like are intentionally connecting, and we would set aside all of the stresses of the hospital and the things we were dealing with our toddler and whatever else we were thinking about. You know, you're thinking about like the finances of how this is all going to work, and when am I going to go back to work, and how is that going to work with time, and you know, all the things that we were thinking about. We would set aside all of those worries and stresses, and we'd often go across the room to like the parent lounge, or at one point I got my own room there that I could stay in overnight or just hang out in during the day. And we would just eat dinner together. Sometimes we had someone bring us dinner. Sometimes we brought our own stuff, or we ordered in. And that was our like 20 to 30 minutes of us time, like dedicated us time we knew we had every day. And we would just sit and hang out and chat. And that made the biggest difference for us, I think, because we took that time that we could have been doing so many other things and said, this is really important. This is really important. And it probably wasn't as long as we were spending with our kids or, doing these other things, but we made that dedicated effort to connect with each other. And then we still had date night, and this one's so silly. So the weekend after we had our daughter, she was born on a Friday, I had planned like a baby moon type of thing. And while I was laying in the bed on bed rest, I had to like call and cancel everything.
Oh
But
no.
we still stuck to our plans because grandma was planning on having the toddler overnight. And so we drove down the street. We had the best babysitters for our tiny baby, the most expensive
Right,
babysitters.
right. The
We
medical
drove down
coverage.
yeah, we drove down the street and went to one of our very favorite restaurants. And then we came back and spent, for those who aren't familiar with NICU lingo, the cares, they call it cares. And so you have a routine of cares, and they come in and they might bathe their baby and they change their diaper, and that's when they feed them and all that kind of stuff, and check their vitals and all that kind of stuff. And so I usually would stay for nighttime cares by myself, but he stayed with me. And because he didn't have to go get our toddler and put our toddler to bed. And so he stayed with me for nighttime cares. We did those together. And then we went home together and hung out and just watched a movie. And because I went home every night to get a good night's sleep and be with the toddler the next day. And then the next morning we were able to get up and eat breakfast together and everything before we went on our way. And it was like very basic, like normal life things, but it was a date because it was intentional time we were setting aside together to have fun and connect. And the next weekend we ordered in pizza from a pizza place near us, and we watched we were watching Psych at the time, and he brought our DVDs, and we watched like 2 episodes of Psych and ate pizza while sitting in the bed in a room that they had set aside for us. And then the next week we had planned to go get hot chocolate at a chocolate place that's behind the hospital that we loved, but we brought our daughter home instead. And so we just did like an at-home date night. And so it was setting aside that time for date night in addition to that daily connection, that it was like something fun we were doing that felt like normal life and was aside from work and taking care of the kids and all that. And then I think the other thing I would say, and I remember this a lot from our time in the NICU and just from times that we've had a hard time, is we took time to laugh. Like
That's good.
the nurses would always come in and be like, what are you guys giggling about? And we would just be laughing about stupid things together, and we would be laughing with the nurses and with each other. And we just let that serious side step aside, and we were obviously still making time to discuss the issues and what our toddler needed and what the daily struggles were with the NICU baby and what came up and all that jazz. But I think I would say daily connecting time, still make time to date each other, even if it's not what your normal date night looks like, and making time to laugh and have fun together. And those are like the three things that I think about. And I think about when we go through, it can be hard, I think, during trials to laugh together, to be like, we shouldn't be having fun, we shouldn't laugh. And I think that's so important. And I think thinking about what brought you together as a couple, and I think that's why laughing rings true for us, is we just love to laugh together. We love to go to comedy shows. We love to watch comedy specials. We love to send each other jokes, just tell funny stories about the day. And so for us, that's something. And maybe it would be like a love of music, and you just sit down and listen to music together and share new songs or something. Just taking that time to connect on that deep level, that and that personal level, not necessarily I call it the business side of marriage,
Right.
together.
Yeah, you definitely have to have those talks times, and then like we're intentional of that with date nights, even like you said, if it's in the NICU. Right now ours are Wednesday nights together in the NICU because we have a sitter
Right.
for the others. And yet that just happened this week where we had to be like, no, let's not work on even marriage puzzle stuff. That's more work and coaching calls. It's like, no, let's just be together and talk about, like you said, the non-business stuff, even
Yeah.
the schedules of the kids and all that. But that's, like you said, being intentional. And what I heard from all your takeaways and points too is like kind of a rhythm and routine, and
Mhm.
also knowing what you prioritize. So
Yes.
I would say we're similar in that of like, I try to be so scheduled, and I know that can be for different personalities, because young kids thrive when there's a routine. So I'm,
Yes.
obviously a mom, and we need that, but it's also helped our marriage know when is date night and what is our rhythm and when are we going to talk, and those rhythm, but also what do you prioritize? I mean, that's your brand, right? A prioritized marriage.
Yes.
But what I heard in that too is you guys obviously already had priorities set before your NICU experience. So you stuck to that, like even so anyone listening, I would say what do you prioritize? Maybe write those down, talk about it and write those down before trials come, or what even tomorrow brings you, because that's kind of what we're learning in this season of dinner times are really important for our family. So date
Hmm.
nights are important for our marriage, even if that means we are driving to the NICU to spend time together right now and kind of combining that, but we still try to go out for dinner or dessert to have talk time for us. But then for the rest of our kids, yeah, we're home for dinner and bedtime, because those are what we prioritize. And I know, again, I'm talking more family perspective, but hopefully that's a
Yes.
takeaway for anyone's like in any stage of marriage, that if you don't know what those are to you, like talk about them, define them. And I love the laughter too. That should be something we prioritize as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I think something else I thought of is we looked we thought about the other person's needs. I think in stressful times like that, you can have so many needs and so many stresses. And one thing I did is, my husband would go to work every day, and I would take my son to whoever's house around lunchtime. And so while my son was taking his morning nap, I always emptied and loaded the dishwasher. I don't know how we had dishes because we were never home, but I always emptied.
You always have dishes.
It was
It's like
like a sense of
laundry and
normalcy.
dishes. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a sense of normalcy for me every morning. And then I would make my husband his lunch. So like it was just something I could do to show him that, like, while I'm taking care of our baby and like putting so much time into that, and I'm taking care of myself and I'm taking care of my kid, like I still see you and I still care about you and I want to help you. And so I would drop that off to him at work on my way to the hospital. And it took me, an extra 5 to 10 minutes to get to my child, but I'd just stop in and say, hey, and drop off his lunch and give him a kiss. And it was another opportunity for like a very brief connection. But my love language is acts of service. And so for me, I saw that as an act of service. It was a way that I was serving him in that moment when I felt like you could serve me a lot. You know what I mean? I think we can get into that. Like, I'm struggling really bad, or, um, whatever that stage of life is like for you, and kind of how you said your priorities, like you shift into that and you have to figure out how are we going to continue to keep our priorities in this new season of life, because it's not going to look like you want it to look or your ideal or anything, and you have to figure out how you're going to make that happen, and it might not work, and so you might have to try again, but being willing to take the time to focus on those priorities and figure those out.
Yeah, absolutely. That's where it goes back down to even, like we said before, even budgeting. That
Yes.
would kind of speak to your priorities, kind of where you put your money is what you're gonna, put first with your time and
Hmm.
attention. And so I love that, even though our season right now is not fancy date nights, that's not something that with the medical expenses,
Yeah.
like, oh, we can't invest in our marriage now because of this, because we've always put that as priority, even with kids, and our kids know that. So we'll never miss a day in the NICU to be, by our baby's bedside. But yeah, I there's boundaries, I guess. It goes back to the rhythms of how am I going to do all of this? How am I going to care for
Yeah.
this child who's, far away from us, and then these kids, and then a husband, and if you're working or whatever. But I would say, yeah, list those priorities, and you can't put your spouse on the back burner. You can't
No.
forget about them. So I love what you said about serving them. I think even in a hard season and you're overwhelmed, it's easy just to be selfish and be like, can't you see all the things I'm doing and all the things I have? And this is overwhelming. But man, your heart must have been so selfless to serve him in that season, especially as the mom. And I hope that then he served you, back. And it just kind of then, it's not to give and take, right? No one's
Mhm.
keeping score, but it just kind
Yeah.
of naturally can happen when you serve each other and prioritize and put each other first.
Yeah. And I think for me, it was something that like it filled me up myself, because it wasn't something that he was like, you need to make me lunch every day. I need you to bring. It was something I chose to do on my own. And not saying that you can't make a request of something you need from your spouse and they can't fill that need for you happily, but it was something that filled me up, because it was something that I could do for him when I felt like I was not able to give him everything, you know what I mean? Not able to do our normal that he was used. I don't know. That starts to sound a little do you
Yeah,
know what I'm trying to
yeah,
say? Yeah.
totally. Yeah, it's so good. And that's where like I see that, obviously on social media and stuff like that. But that's why I wanted to ask kind of what made you start a prioritized marriage for a website and Instagram, or wherever, you've reached. What inspired you to do that?
So I mentioned I've always loved like relationship dynamics. I've always like as a teenager I said I'm a hopeless romantic. Like I love stories. I love to know about each, like I love date night. I love things like that. But as I started studying in school, I heard about this phenomenon called gray divorce. And I feel like it's come out a little bit as Bill and Melinda Gates got divorced last year. It was something that was talked about a lot, which I got really excited about, because I wanted people to realize it was a thing that you can go have this great marriage and then it all ends after so many years together. Um, and there's a lot of different reasons for that, and they're just starting to do a lot of research on it. It's a big chunk of divorced couples are gray divorce, where they get divorced after age 50 or whatever, and some of them are second marriages, but a lot of them are first, and some of them it's their marriage had fallen apart a long time ago and they stayed together for the kids, or they get to that empty nest retirement phase and they realize we don't really like being together, we don't know who each other is anymore, and there's lots of other issues, and it's something I would love to dive in and research more and find out like it's because of this, but what caused that, like were you putting your marriage as priority? And so for me myself, I feel like that if you are putting in those daily efforts, and it doesn't have to be, I always tell people prioritizing your marriage doesn't look like putting your marriage first all the time. It's not putting your spouse above everything else. It's not saying your spouse's needs are the most important all the time. But kind of how we've talked about, like always making time for each other and for your marriage, because it is important. Just like you're not spending 24/7 with your kids or 24/7 at your desk at work, because it is important to make money. It's the little things, and my favorite quote from John Gottman says, "It's the small things done often that make the biggest difference." And I love that because it's not the big, like, overnight getaways or your weekly date nights or the big gesture that you do on their birthday or Valentine's Day or whatever. Those aren't the things that are going to build this big, huge, great marriage. They do contribute to it, but it's those little times you're spending together every day, or the little ways you're serving your spouse, or the little ways you're connecting physically. Those little things you do every single day that are going to make a big difference. And so that's my goal, is sharing ways that couples can do that in their own marriage without feeling like they're breaking the bank, or they have no time for all the things that are also important, or they're never taking care of anyone else. Like, what are those realistic everyday ways that you can let your spouse know that they are important to you and that they are a priority, and that your relationship you're building, not just your parenting partners, or you're running a business together, or you're, running a household together. That's not the important part. That relationship that started your family off is important to you, and how you're working to do that. And so that's just kind of become my passion, and why I share what I share.
That's awesome. So yeah, tell us a little bit more about what is on your website, or what resources could people find there?
Yeah, I talk a lot about date night, creative date night solutions is what I say. So not just your, go out and spend $100 and hire a babysitter. Like, I will share a date night idea, and then like 5 different ways you can make it happen for whatever your budget is, your time frame is, and your circumstance. Can you go out or stay home? I love to share ways to continually communicate with your spouse, whether that's communicating respect, or your needs, or gratitude, or communicating to connect, or communicating to support. That importance of communication. I started sharing a lot about intimacy, and this is not something I ever thought I was going to share, but I share about it on a broader spectrum. I do talk about like the physical side of intimacy, but intimacy, my definition is the like, know, and trust you have in a person, and how vulnerable you feel like you can be with them. And so I talk about that. So I have lots of just fun resources, date night ideas, suggestions, just those simple things that um, they're not like one size fits all. And so I always share different ways that they can make it happen, and suggestion, real life examples. Like, I'll share about the NICU, or things we're going through, and ways that couples can take that and apply that in their own marriage. It's not the, one size fits all marriage advice. I don't think anything is.
Right.
But how can you make this work for you?
Yeah, I love that. And that's why I said I love what you're doing. And Thomas and I, we've kind of had to get away from our top three because of the season of life we're in, and we're having lots of guests and just kind of one-off topics. But our top three, as people sometimes in the marriage space have this niche, this one. We can narrow ours down to just one, but our top three that we say is, kind of all marriage stands on. If it was like a three-legged stool, you wouldn't be able to stand without one of them, is sex, money, and communication. So you definitely have the intimacy things out there that we don't shy away from as well. And then money, like you said, with the budgeting, we do a lot of my Thomas is a financial coach as well.
Okay.
We're marriage coaches, but he has a whole space for that. And then communication. And so just one funny thing I loved, I shouldn't say it's funny because you probably thought it was serious, but that you put out, I think this week even, that just like those conversation starters with your spouse,
Yes.
that communication. So I saw one that said, I'm giving you credit here, but you said, if you were given money to start a museum of your choice, what kind of museum would you start? And I just love that. Like, I've never heard of a question like that, but just those conversation starters too. I think if people are like, okay, I could do date night, I can, set my rhythms and prioritize, and I can talk to my spouse, but then you go do it and you're just staring at each other.
Yeah.
Want to do it again. So I love what you're putting out there, even for that communication piece too.
Yeah. I think it's fun to just continually get to know your spouse. And I don't think we ever know everything there is to know about each other. Like, things are changing. We change as we grow, and you think but you don't know until you ask. And even things from like your childhood, I still learn about random things about my husband. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. We've been together 11 years, which isn't forever, but it still feels like I should know everything about you by now, right? And you don't. So
But
it's always fun to get
that's
to.
what makes it fun. Yeah, I think that's what it's
Yeah,
like. It's not a new relationship, but it's it's something to like engage in. Like I want to know more. I want to keep learning you and growing, and that's really what I don't know. That's what Thomas and I have fun in our marriage. That we're coming up on 16 years married, but yeah, it doesn't matter about the number if you're still newlyweds. I feel like we are because even in this season that we're not together as much, and that's been a change for us because we like work together, we're home together, like we're around each other, and so now with split schedules and the drive time, I think we're talking so much on the phone, but it's like
mhm,
I don't even want to listen to the radio or something because I miss my husband and I want to learn more or hear about his day. And so I think we said it last week, like if you don't miss your spouse, then you're not spending enough time together. But if that's not in your season, where we're more apart now than together, I think it's those, conversations, those questions that should be intriguing, to ask, to
yeah,
want to learn, instead of letting the physical distance or time really push you apart. Because then I think that's where those marriages, and the 50, 50-year-olds or however long we've been married for 50 years or whatever, because they get bored. They get bored with each other.
yeah,
So
yeah.
we never
And they
want
don't know each
more.
other anymore,
Yeah, yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Amberly. I love all your perspective and insight, and how you are, a living example of prioritizing your marriage. So remind us again how to find your website and Instagram, or are you on Facebook? Where can we find you?
Yeah, so my website is a prioritizedmarriage.com, and I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at a prioritized marriage. I try to share a little bit different content on all of them, but also similar. So for whoever wants whatever. So yeah, that's where you can find me and where I hang out. And it was really fun chatting with you.
Yeah, awesome. And if you're new for our Marriage Puzzle podcast, you can find Thomas and I on social media as well, Instagram and Facebook at Marriage Puzzle, as well as marriagepuzzle.com. And as always, we look forward to you joining us next Monday, where together we'll work on marriage one puzzle piece at a time. See you later.